Hello and welcome everyone to the first in a long time of Co-Produce Care's live streams. My name is Sophie Glynn. I'm director at Co-Produce Care, and for a while we have been doing live streams. We've taken a bit of a hiatus, and I'm so excited to be back with an absolutely fantastic panel this time round. And of course, we're going to be discussing one of our favourite subjects, the CQC. And the ultimate question we're going to ask our guests at the end is, should we keep or should we quit the CQC? So what do you think? Put it in the chat, invite others to come along, share the link, tell a friend, bring some more in with us. Of course, if you can't listen to the whole thing right now, you can always share it. I know a lot of people who watch our live streams on playback. That's absolutely fine. Still, put something in the chat. Let us know what you think. And when we say keep or quit, we mean, should we keep it, but in a slightly, as it is, or should we quit it and have it reformed in a totally different way? So I'm absolutely delighted to have fantastic panelists, Jane Townson, Adam Purnell, Mei-Ling, Huang, Melanie, Weatherley, Martin Green, Neil Granton, Raina, Summerson. Absolutely fantastic panel, and huge thanks for them for turning out today. It's 5 o'clock, so normally everyone would clock off probably at this point, but we're keeping people going. So make sure you keep them going and ask questions as and when you wish. So I'm going to go straight into what we're talking about today, and I'm not going to do too much of an intro. So a few of you may know that the Department of Health and Social Care, they commissioned what was called, or what we commonly call, the DASH review, conducted or led by Dr. Penny Dash. So she was asked to review the operational effectiveness of the Care Quality Commission. Of course, that's the regulator. So if you work in health and social care, if you have a residential care home, if you do supported living, dom care, or even if you are a GP and ICSs now, they are your regulator. So they have a huge amount of responsibility. And I feel like the DASH report simply just really qualified what we working in the sector already knew. So they did their first interim report in 2024, laying the ground for what was going to come in October, which was their final report. And they had several recommendations. I think it was about 9 or so altogether. We're not going to go through all of them. And there were less recommendations, more findings, but we will go through some of them. But they did speak to quite a few people within the CQC. So they had about 200 people that they spoke to, senior managers, caregivers, clinicians, over 100 people within the CQC. And of course, people within the organisation also used it as an opportunity to try and get their view across around what they thought about the CQC. So very interesting stuff. I'm just going to invite all my panelists in to say hello and introduce themselves. And then I am going to take some people out because we've got a fantastic number of panelists today. And we're going to have a bit of a discussion and then switch them around. But yes, please let us know what you think. Should we keep or quit the CQC? Write something in the chat whilst I add everybody in. This is probably the clunkiest bit of the live stream. And then we'll get a little bit slicker after that. Okay. Wonderful. So can I go to Neil? You're at the top of my screen. Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Sophie. My name is Neil Grant. I'm a regulatory lawyer. I've been working in the sector for over 30 years now. Originally, I was acting for inspectorates, but these days I only act for providers of care services.
Great, thank you for that, Neil. And Raina?
Hi, I'm Raina Summerson, Group Chief Executive at Agincare. So we're an independent care provider ranging home care, live-in care, supported living, care homes, and an Ofsted, also trading company. Just launched a not-for-profit children's service. My background began as a care worker, and I was a social worker, and I was also a regulator for 5 years. So, but last 20 years in Agincare as an independent social care provider.
That is incredible. What a CV. And I think I'm going to be really excited to hear about your views, because you cover both adult and social care and so many different types of services. So that's super exciting. Just to let everyone know, my internet is a bit glitchy. You should be able to hear me, but I might be talking out of sync. But as long as you can hear me, that's the main thing. Adam Purnell, a bit of I'm sure everybody knows you, but yeah, do introduce yourself.
Hi, Sophie. It's a total jump scare every time I see that photo of me that gets put up now. I'm like, oh, who is that? Totally different to me now. So I'm Adam. I'm co-founder and director of Caring View, with the online health and social care platform. We have current and engaging conversations around all aspects of social care. That's by night. By day, I'm a group quality manager for a series of nursing homes. Used to be director of social care for the Institute of Health and Social Care Management. Loudmouth and all-around advocate for social care.
I love that. We love a loudmouth, and we need a loudmouth on this panel here today. Thank you for that. And Jane, can you do a short intro, please?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Jane Townson, Chief Executive of the Homecare Association. So we represent and support providers of care in people's own homes. About half of our members are SMEs and the others are medium and larger organisations. Prior to this, I was CEO of a not-for-profit care provider that delivered home care, housing with care, supported living for people with disabilities, and operated 30 care homes.
Amazing. Thank you, Jane. And Mei-Ling?
Hi, everybody. I'm Mei-Ling. I am a partner at RWK Goodman, and we are a law firm that caters to the social care sector. I've known a lot of these people on this call for quite a while, and I'm glad to see a bunch of loudmouths. I would say we all probably fit into that category, don't we? My firm works with lots of the local care associations, with Melanie at the Care Association Alliance, Melanie who's just joined us, and other organizations like Care England and the Outstanding Society. We're very interested in promoting the sort of well-being of care providers as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mei-Ling. And Martin, I know we can't see you, but we can hear you, and that's more than enough. So if you could introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you very much. I'm Martin Green. I'm the Chief Executive of Care England, and I apologise, for some reason my camera doesn't seem to be working. I'm one of the people who's quite shy at making my views known, and I'm not very well. I'm not very good at shouting my mouth off. And anybody who knows me will know that's completely untrue. But Care England represents a lot of care providers. We have large corporates, we have some medium-sized groups, and a lot of small providers as well. So I think we see what's going on across the sector, and we've been extremely vocal about the current position regarding the CQC.
Excellent. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing more of that. I see, Melanie, you're in transit. So if you have got a signal, I'll hand over to you. But if not, we will come back to you in the second half anyway. I think she might be. Can you hear us, Melanie? I think she might be in a tunnel or some such. So I am just going to take out some of you lovely ones, and we're going to proceed. So bear with me a second. Take some of you out. You have to also bear with me because it's been a while since I've done one of these. So I am still getting used to it. Being back. There we are. And yeah. Excellent. So I've got Mei-Ling, I've got Jane, I've got Adam, I've got Martin. So I'm going to go straight into the first of their conclusions. That's what they're called, the conclusions I've got up here. Actually, I need to, so I've done that one. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that they were quite strong about is the right one here now that I wanted to talk about. Okay, we're just going to go straight into this one. So delays in producing reports. Now, this might not seem like a major one, but it can have a huge effect on providers. And I think it really goes into the idea as well that so one of the first conclusions they had was poor operational performance. So 15 6,800 inspections and assessments were done back in 2019, and only 6,700 inspections and assessments were carried out in 2023. And I've got a quote here from their the dash report that says, local authorities, not on the screen, but I'll just read it out. Local authorities, ICBs, won't contact us, banks won't lend money to care homes without CQC approval, and investors get put off. That's from a care provider that's saying the effect of not having a report on time, and of course, some people are just really struggling to get a report at all, has on their operational ability. So I wondered if panelists could speak to that point, and anything else relating to the timeliness of the report and the amount that we actually see the regulator. I feel like, you know, Jane, you work with a lot of providers out in the community, so the home care providers. Have you seen a similar worry that they're just not getting inspected, they're not getting their report? Well, that's fine. Mei-Ling, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I've got an even more shocking statistic than you've given, which I think sort of follows on nicely. So in addition to Penny Dash's report, we also had Professor Sir Mike Richards' report into the single assessment framework, which he was asked to undertake by CQC's board itself. And one of the numbers that he put in the report was that between December, about SAF inspections specifically, as opposed to inspections that were also done under the old system. So he said that between December 2023 and September 2024, a grand total of 1,379 inspections were undertaken using the single assessment framework. And the other thing is only 885 of those were in adult social care services. So we have to remember we have nearly 30,000 care homes and home care services in England. So if they only inspected, you know, that many, it's something like 3% of adult social care services were inspected within that 9 to 10 month period, September 2023 to December 2023 to September 2024, using the single assessment framework. So the whole system effectively was kind of shutting down during that period. So of course it has, you know, loads of effect, and I could let other people come in about the effect of that, but I just wanted to throw that stat in there because I think you know, it's even kind of worse than depicted in Penny Dash's report.
Absolutely.
On top of that, we published a report at the end of August that at that time, 23% of home care services had never been inspected, and 38% of them hadn't had an inspection for between 4 and 8 years. So altogether, about 60% of them had either never been inspected or had such an out-of-date rating that it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. And you talked about lenders not investing in care homes. Well, in home care, quite a number of local authorities don't allow providers to bid for work if they haven't got a CQC rating, or if they've got a requires improvement rating, even if they got that 8 years ago. Meanwhile, other local authorities decided that they would allow providers to bid if they didn't have a rating, and asked them to do a self-assessment of their quality. Like, what could possibly go wrong with that? You know? So kind of, and then I think it's also important to say that certainly amongst our members anyway, one of our members that operates in 97 local authority areas said that they've only ever had 4 contract monitoring visits from local authorities, and 2 of them were from the same local authority. So there's no quality monitoring going on in a lot of places, in addition to what the Care Quality Commission should be doing either.
Yeah, I think also there's another issue which really came at home to me, which was the arrogance of the inspectorate. So, for example, I had a member who had 3 days of inspection, and that inspection was very detailed, and they produced a lot of things that they gave to the inspector. And then at 7:29 on the Friday night, they got a list of, I think it was 15 different documents. And then the email said, I want this on my desk by 9 o'clock on Monday morning, which was done by the staff all working like maniacs during the weekend. And then they waited 5.5 months for the CQC report. So this was an indicator for me, not only about the appalling administrative processes, but it was also an indicator of the arrogance that sits at the heart of the culture in CQC. And that's something that we need to really address. And the new chief executive needs to absolutely set some clear parameters about not only performance, but also culture.
That's really helpful. And in fact, they have, as you rightly said, they've got a new head who knows what he's going to make any difference or not.
This is where I come in with my loud mouth, though, because I think you were at the same event I was at, Martin, where I think I quizzed a gentleman from the CQC, and they talk around all these changes, all of these fixes that they're going to bring into place. And in 2023, they launched this equality, diversity, inclusive workforce plan for the CQC. They're going to have a diverse, inclusive workforce. And when we look at the board that make up the CQC, something like 90% are male and white. You know, you've got very few female on there and very few people of colour on there, and they can't commit to a diverse plan to make sure that our regulator that represents social care around the country is diverse. And lo and behold, they get rid of one white man at the top and replace him with another one from the NHS, bear in mind, with very little sort of pleasure about making sure social care is supported in this. I mean, just on the delay in the reporting and the actual quality of things, if you ask any social care provider what one of their values are, I bet you 9 out of 10 will say trust. As a provider, it's about being trustworthy. It's about having trust. And actually, have we got that trust in the regulator now? You know, Regulation 17, good governance, they will come round to us. They will ask us whether we're doing our audits. They will ask us whether we've got oversight of our service. They will ask us whether we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And we can clearly see that they are doing that themselves, but just 3% of social care every year. So how do we have a regulator coming around telling us that we have got poor governance and oversight over our services when actually the regulator of the country, which we pay for, which we give hard-earned money towards, don't have full oversight and governance of the services that they are obliged to do? Bearing in mind, they are just a regulator. They are not there to inspect quality. They are there to make sure we are adhering to regulation. They are not there to tell us whether we're good or amazing or fantastic or outstanding, as they like to call it. They are there to say, yes, you've met Reg 12, you have met Reg 15, you have met Reg 17, you have met Reg 18. Not you've met Reg 17 and you're one of the best providers we've ever seen. Not down to them to say that. For me, we need the regulation and we need regulators. And they should do just that, regulate. Keep the bias for themselves and crack on with doing what they're supposed to do.
I think this is a really good point that you've introduced, and I'm just going to pop this up, and I come to Mei-Ling in a minute about the loss of credibility. So that was one of their conclusions of the DASH report. Obviously, I'm using the DASH as the premise of this, but we can go outside of it. There's other reports that have gone on as well. But the report found there was a loss of credibility within the health and social care sectors due to their loss of sector expertise and wider restructuring, resulting in lost opportunities for improvement. And of course, when you go back to the core legislative aims of the CQC, it's there for the person, for the individual that's receiving support. And I do always think, which is why my question around, is it, fit for purpose? How much does it need to be reformed? Is it doing what it should be doing? Because I remember the days when I used to every year expect an inspector at my door. It was very regular. I remember the days when, the ratings were similar, but it was excellent and good and, went down like that. And they were good and bad because they did focus a lot on paperwork, but it was very similar to what we have today, except not as present. So I'm just wondering, from your point of view, Mei-Ling, do you feel like in a legal sense, it's from this report, from the other reports, is it fitting what the legislation wanted it to do when it created the CQC?
Maybe not. I think the problem is more that they've overcomplicated everything. They've made it far too complicated. They've made it, the way they are going about it has they've lost their objectivity. You know, they've moved to this risk-based system during COVID, when they changed to a system of, instead of going in on a timely basis, you know, a year, 18 months or whatever, they started focusing on red flags of risk coming across their radar. And I think that that's where they started to sort of go wrong in terms of what they were doing, because when the objectivity is lost, then they, you know, then you start to lose the credibility and everything. And you know, just overcomplicating it has slowed the whole system down, which means they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that was another one of the findings in Mike Richards' report, was that they are sort of failing to fulfill their primary purpose. That was what he said. And that is really damning. And I think it's because they've gone so far and wide with what they're doing and made it so overly complicated that they just can't sort of fulfill that primary function anymore.
I'm not going to make excuses for the Care Quality Commission, but I do think it's important to point out that the market has shifted behind, you know, around them, as it were. So, for example, there are a lot more home care providers than there were 10 years ago. And councils also, some of them have allowed a lot more onto their framework agreements, and they can't keep up with it. I think there are, you know, we've said to the Care Quality Commission many times that they need to set the bar high for registration to make sure that only people that really know what they're doing can set up shop. And we've seen lots of examples of people not really knowing what they're doing, setting up shop. And then that becomes more of a problem if the regulator's not there checking compliance, and neither are the councils. So, you know, for me, the question about, do we need them or not? Well, we definitely, in my opinion, need some form of oversight, because complexity of need is increasing all the time.
Jane, I agree with that to a point, but I think the point that I would want to make is the point you've just made, which is actually they're the people who are supposed to be the gatekeepers of whether or not people are able to deliver high quality care. And frankly, I'm sick to death of the public sector finding some excuse not to deliver. I mean, I could say, oh, it's really complicated. I'm not going to give the new national insurance contributions for the next 5 years because it's really complicated in my system. But of course, I wouldn't be allowed to get away with that. And I have no sympathy whatsoever with them. You know, the world changes and they need to be nimble and change with it. And actually, as the gatekeepers of who they are going to register, they could have stopped that endless descent into 1,000 flowers blooming in Halifax, because Halifax wanted to push the cost of care down as low as it would go. And so my view is it's their problem and they are there to regulate, and they should have been doing it. And the issue for me was they had a thoroughly incompetent chief executive who should never have been appointed in the first place, who turned them into some kind of police force. And it's interesting to note that in the year he took over, the fines that were levied were 100,000. And in the year he left, they were at 10 million. And that's 10 million pounds that's been taken out of the system. And they just saw themselves as being police people. And with that came an attitude which was also completely unhelpful and at variance with the whole notion of inspection and regulation being about enablement and sector improvement.
I completely agree that it's their responsibility to sort themselves out. I wasn't making excuses for them, but I was just saying that that is a thing and they haven't moved with the times and their IT sucks.
Oh, yeah, well.
It's I feel like we're going to have to agree to disagree on that between you two, but I do definitely think there is something about leadership, because they commissioned the report that you were talking about, Mei-Ling, themselves, the board did. Then you had the DASH report, and there's another DASH report coming next year about safety, I think it is. Why commission your own internal report when you've had so many years and the countless amount of times I've been asked by the CQC to report or respond on something because of they're doing something they want to consult? Surely they have enough information to just fix the thing. are they chronically underfunded to do the job that they need to do? Or am I just making excuses?
I think they probably are underfunded. The reason I think they commissioned Mike Richards' report was because Penny Dash gave her interim findings in July, and they were not pretty. And prior to that, she would have given the heads up to CQC, and CQC's board probably said, like a lot of providers who come under fire, oh, we need to show some insight here. So let's commission our own report to figure out what went wrong with the single assessment framework. I think that's what happened. I don't know for sure that that's what happened. That is my guess about what happened. So, you know, it's good that they got that report, because he picks apart the single assessment framework methodology and the implementation, and he makes all kinds of recommendations for how to fix it. And I think they needed to show how they're going to fix it. So if you get inspected and you get an inadequate rating, what's the first thing you do? You do an action plan. That is CQC's analysis, so that they can formulate their action plan. His recommendations are the action plan. Today in London, they had an event, which was a sort of consultation with providers and other people. And the things that they were talking about there were whether they should prioritize the assessment of services or work on fixing everything. Whether they should continue to draw on previous inspections to assist with the scoring, use the old ratings as part of the scoring system, whether they should retire the scoring approach. It was all the stuff that was in Mike Richards' report, which was then discussed with providers. So I think that's why they did it, just to start showing that they were improving before Penny Dash's final report hit the fan on October the 15th.
Okay.
I mean, someone at CQC really needs to understand smart action planning, though, because all these people come out and tell them that they're doing rubbish at this and rubbish at that. So they release a statement that says, oh, we're looking at doing this. We're going to try and do this. We might do this. We're thinking about doing this with no definables, no measurables, with no idea actually what they are doing. And we're getting to a point now where you're in a boat in the ocean and you've got holes in it. Let's say you've got 15 holes in it. Is it easier to actually put plugs in those holes while you're trying to sail it, or jump ship and swim to shore and let's start again, let's build a new raft? Because actually the single assessment framework now is sinking fast, and it's going to cost God knows how much to try and fix it, to put it into something that's actually manageable, when really we should just probably go back to the drawing board and go, right, look, we've screwed up, let's start again, let's try and figure out something that actually works. Let's just go back to the old system, because we're heading there anyway with all of these changes we're planning. Let's just go backwards.
That seems like the easiest way, just to rewind.
Yeah.
It shouldn't cost that much money to rewind.
No,
but you know what annoys me? I agree absolutely, Adam, because what annoys me as well, when there's a service that's failing, they talk about an action plan. We still have not seen an action plan with time scales and key performance indicators. We have been calling for that from the moment that this dysfunctional regulator hit the buffers, because Penny Dash finally exposed them for what they were. And actually, they need to come up with an action plan. And you're right, Adam, what they do is they're now encouraging us to help them find the solutions for their incompetence. And in the meantime, I've got members who are paying £3 million a year for this nonsense. Nobody's talking about refunds. Well, they need to start talking about refunds in every other bit of the economy. When you get a service and you pay for it, and when you don't get a service, you get a refund. It's as simple and as clear as that. So I am frankly sick to death of hearing this nonsense about them not having, talking about consultation. They need to come up with an action plan. They need to tell us what they're going to do. They need to give us the time frames, and they need to also recognise that for about 5 years, they've sat and done nothing, and we've been paying for that.
It's not just the fees, Martin, it's also the lost income, from not being able to bid for contracts and things. I'm quite surprised that some providers haven't tried to take legal action against them.
Absolutely. Or maybe they have, Mei-Ling, I don't know.
People ask about it. I think it's difficult. You have to show proximate cause for the loss, and also if you were in court and you were before a judge and you'd say the regulator made me lose money, he's going to say, come on, they're the regulator, they're credible, It's going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, of course, we're in a very different situation, because now the Secretary of State described them as not fit for purpose in a debate in Parliament. So that's what I'm using as my approach. I'm telling my members as well, if you get a bad report, and particularly if you get one that's based on years ago, the ratings from years ago, what I would do is first of all, I'd put up that pathetic little response from the departed Kate Taroney, acknowledging that they're not fit for purpose and apologising for their poor performance. I then put up the quote from the Secretary of State at the side of it, and then tell the public this is the credibility of the people who've judged our performance. Because in Norfolk as well, the leader of the council told Norfolk citizens to ignore the CQC rating because it wasn't worth the paper it was written on.
These are all.
You know
Yeah,
what's
one
really
last word,
sad?
Adam.
Last point, Sophie, last point. You know what's really sad about this, though, is we spend all of our time, and we're doing it tonight, I'm not calling any of us out, but we do this tonight all the time, playing a blame game, pointing fingers at who's wrong, who's done what, who's messed up, who's not working properly. The government do it, whichever party's in power, they do it, the CQC do it. And actually, no one stops to give a damn about the people that actually matter, and that's the people using the services. And very few times has anybody sat there and gone, well, actually, this is the impact of a poor regulator. This person's not going to have good care. This person's not going to enjoy their care. This person's not going to have enough services to go to. Instead, the fingers will point and go, social care is failing. NHS is failing. People are underfunded. Tories have done this. Labour have done that. And actually, can we just stop for a second and think about people, the millions of people in this country requiring care, health and care. And we need to just stop this whole sort of jibbing each other and pointing fingers of blame and go, how do we just get this right for people? Services organizations, yes, we need it right. We need money. We need to be able to be sustainable. But actually, can we just bring it back to people and figure out what it is we need to do to make sure that the people that actually matter are getting the services they need? Let's make sure the framework meets the needs of people who use services, not trying to make it look like we're doing our job and, forgive me for saying this about the CQC, justifying their own existence, because that's what a lot of it is currently. How do we bring it back to people?
And in order to do that, we have to focus on the outcomes being achieved by services again, which is something they're not doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you all so much. Before you go, obviously you can follow Mei-Ling at RWK Goodman for legal advice. You've got Jane Townson from the UK Homecare Association if you are a home care provider, Martin Green at Care England for care home providers, supported living as well. And obviously make sure you tune into the Caring View, which is hosted by Adam Purnell and Mark Tops, although I did nearly think that someone else was posing as Adam because you're looking so svelte these days. Good job. But last question before I switch over to the other panelists. So are we keeping CQC as it is, or are we going to quit it and start again with a new type of regulation? May 1st, Mei-Ling.
I think CQC is in special measures, effectively, and they should be given 6 months in which to improve. And if they don't do it, then they should probably get a notice of proposal to cancel their registration. But practically speaking, I'd say give them a chance, because I think the easiest thing to do is roll back in time, roll back the system a bit, go back to something that we had before, which was kind of working, but still had problems with proportionality and all that kind of stuff. Because inventing a whole new thing will just take a really long time.
Thank you. Jane?
Well, we definitely need oversight of some kind. I think there are a lot of very committed, experienced people within CQC. It's a shame that they've lost a lot as well. And if we were to recast it, people would have to be found from somewhere, and it would probably be a lot of the same people. So I think I would agree with Mei-Ling that we need to give the new leadership a chance. It probably won't, I think it was going to take them longer than 6 months would be my guess, but we should be able to see some improvement of some kind in that sort of time. But they've managed to make such a mess of it. It'll probably be a few years before we get back on track, I would guess. I don't know what everyone else thinks.
Okay. Martin, do you think we should keep CQC as it is, or does it need overhaul reform?
Well, I think we've got to have a good regulator. I think that's absolutely vital for the sector. I would agree with Mei-Ling and Jane. I would give them some time, but I don't think it needs to be open-ended. I think they need to be really clear that this has been going on now for too long, and we need to tell them that they either pull their act together within 6 or 12 months, or there will be a root and branch reform. But I also think the Secretary of State needs to remove that entire board who have been asleep at the wheel, and that there is nobody in that board, not one single member of them, that has any credibility. And if they had any credibility, they would have resigned by now. And if they aren't big enough to resign and really take responsibility for their own failure, I want the Secretary of State to remove every one of them, and if necessary, bring in some commissioners with a task and finish to bring this back on track. But I don't want that board to get off, as it seems to have done at the moment, with any without any follow through. Because if this was an organisation, that board would be literally squealing. The CQC would be squealing for that board to go, and that board needs to go. And if it isn't going to be removed, then I hope they have the decency to realise that they're completely incompetent and they should skulk away and resign for themselves.
I think this is very interesting. I was hoping that someone would bring up the board, because I do definitely want to cover that next when I was talking about leadership. So thank you, Martin. Excellent. Adam, keep or quit?
So I'm just going to be controversial for the sake of controversial. I'll suck them all off. Let's get a new regulator. No, we do need regulation. Regulation is a must. I think we need to go back to pure regulation, though. I'm not a fan of single word ratings. I'm not a fan of different levels of ratings for services. Either you've met regulation or you haven't met regulation, and that's that. You can give a narrative in a report. You can let the public know in that report how close they were to that sort of regulation. But that is it. You've either met or you have not met regulation. There is no grey area. There is no in between. So for me, let's go back to pure regulation. Let's roll it back even further. Let's go back before the key questions came in around safe, effective, caring, well-led. Let's go all the way back. I'm not saying C-Sky back, but let's just go back to regulation and figure out how it is that we're going to meet the needs of providers in this country and those people using those services. And let's have a look at a new model for quality management, because that's fine. But there's so many people out there checking quality. The biggest thing I have is we will have, and very have our reports. They'll come through and they'll say, your quality is good from the ICB. Your CQC walk through and they tell you rubbish. So there's a disparity in how they report. Let's go back to regulation and separate quality.
Thank you so much. You've all been fantastic. I have asked all my questions. I was going to leave that last one to the end, so you are free to go if you need to. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that. And we've got another few guests to invite, but I'm going to take everyone out for now. Again, this is so clunky. There we go. Excellent. So there you have it. Some fantastic thoughts. I'm going to go straight in to add our other guests. I have two, so I'm guessing we might have lost who has we Melanie.
No pressure on us then, Neil.
No pressure.
Excellent. So what I'll do is I'll just ask you to answer the question. Actually, let's go back to my slides. Have I introduced you two already? Yes, I have. Right. Everyone, excellent. That's fine. We've got that out of the way.
Do we just pick up on some of the points that ended? Is that okay?
You can do, yes. And then I've
or
got.
Do you want to go back to your questions and try and give it some
let's
order?
No, I think that's a great idea, Raina. Thank you. Do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I was just thinking of what Adam finished on, really, because I was kind of part of that regulatory system at that time of the kind of simple. I mean, I was the C-Sky and the kind of NCSC back. And I think several things resonated with the conversation that the other panelists had. And I think there was something around why is regulation there and that purpose. And I always remember my first manager in regulation. I joined regulation when it was still in an in-house service, but I knew it was going external and central government. So it was a kind of time of change. But it was always embedded in me that why are you doing this? You're not doing it to be a job's worth. You're not doing it to score points. You're not doing it to have a power trip. We are in this job of regulation because people matter. This is about public safety, about public awareness, about protection. And I think we've absolutely, from what the other panelists said, I think we've overcomplicated. We've managed to just get ourselves up in all tangled up in knots with all these complex systems. And there is something about the simple days when you said you met a regulation or you didn't, and then there were recommendations about how could this service improve if it chose to. That didn't mean it wasn't fit to be run. It didn't mean, it might mean that you could make a reflection on whether that provider invested enough in that location or service to develop it and optimize it. Or it could be to say, well, actually, this is the basic level of care, and these are actually services where they're really investing and trying to do innovation and new things and bring other things on. So I think there is something about that simplicity and people understanding what are the regulations, and has the regulator just tried to do too much now and be too clever? Or is it because we're in a culture where blame, as someone said earlier, is now needing to be attributed? And I think Streeting's comments, they filled me with a bit of dread, because it was about failure and it was about accountability and blame again. Identify and act on failing, I think, were some words he used. And is that really what it's there for? It was about promotion of good health and good quality care and safe and compassionate care, not about it was about stopping people getting into care service provision who shouldn't be in there, for one. So I think we're talking about inspection, but we lose the sight of that important bit of regulation of registration, stopping people, assessing people's fitness to own and manage services that affected other people's lives. And that's a really key still part of regulation. And then assessing, is it doing what it should do against the law that has been agreed and decided that this is a baseline, and then complementing and showcasing potentially where people are doing over and above that, and allowing the public to make a choice where they then receive care from. And I think we've lost so much of those simple things, as well as some attitudinal lack of partnership and tone and attitude. I'd absolutely second that. That is so irritating with them.
I think what we need to do is just, transcript everything you just said and just send it to the new chief exec and to Dash, who's doing the next one, because I think that encapsulates it beautifully. There's so much in that. And there's so much that I really agree with. Neil, from your point of view, just some responses on those comments and anything from the previous panelists.
Well, there's so much that one could talk about, really, as far as operational performance at CQC is concerned. I think one thing that I always focus on when I deal with cases is the Regulators Code, which is under the Legislative and Regulatory Reform Act of 2006. That sounds a bit obscure, and it is, but it's actually a piece of legislation that CQC is a signatory to, and they're sort of bound by the Regulators Code. They're required to take it into account. And that sets out the principles of good regulation. So those are, for example, consistency in regulation, proportionality, transparency and accountability, and targeting the resources within CQC where they need to be targeted on a risk managed basis, risk assessed basis. And I think if you look at that piece of legislation, the Regulators Code, you don't go far wrong. I mean, I've got the actual code up at the moment, and Para 2 talks about regulators should provide simple and straightforward ways to engage with those they regulate and hear their views. And if I go on to section 6, regulators should ensure that their approach to their regulatory activities is transparent. And it says under para 6.1, regulators should publish a set of clear service standards setting out what those they regulate should expect from them. Now, this has been a piece of legislation that's been around for years. CQC has never done this. There's never, I don't think there's a code of conduct or code of practice within CQC for inspectors. If you go to Ofsted, they do actually have a sort of code of conduct for their inspectors, and indeed for providers as well. But they haven't actually. So I've just written an article about CQC, and at the end I've said I'll be writing to the new chief executive, sending him a copy of the Regulators Code, because there's a lot of content in there which is sensible, that setting service standards is a must for CQC, because we need to have a regulator that functions, that delivers, but we need to hold the regulator to account at the same time.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought it back to what type of guidance and the code that's out there, because sometimes I think people forget what we should be expecting from CQC. And actually, that's the real basics. And we talked earlier about going back to basics. And I really would like to see that happen, because I actually really value a CQC inspection, and not because I just think it's just important, but I just think it's really important for people who live in services. I want to know, if I had a relative, that I could be confident that there is in a care home or anywhere, that they're confident that those services are being inspected by the regulator, as well as the local authority, who I think in our area definitely have stepped up, which has been helpful in regulating services. And actually, it can be quite a supportive process by going in and saying, this is what you need to do and this is what we found. And you work under one goal, which helps people to improve their services. And I think that's really important. And where you've got a rogue provider, you're really seeking out those people. So I do hope that they will get back to that type of operation. I want to go on to, and I don't know whether, because I always think when people, the Department of Health and Social Care, connected to the government, whether there's some kind of agenda of what they want to do with the CQC. Because if you think, there's another review that's been done. Oh, the NHS review, sorry, Darcy, and people think that there's an underlying agenda that's come. Governments normally need to have some kind of report that they can base their changes on, and is this a precursor to something that they have planned for the CQC? So one of the recommendations, or the conclusions, she calls it in the DASH report, is the relationship between the CQC and the department. So what she's saying is their final conclusion was that there are opportunities to improve the sponsorship relationship between the CQC and the Department of Health and Social Care, which I presume just means funding, but it could mean, a closer relationship. I can't really see any problems with that, but maybe there are issues with independence. But if it means they get more money to do what it needs to do, then that could help. But in terms of what the government should do with the CQC, I don't know if you have any ideas or any inspiration with how they should demand that it's changed, or that it does what it should do, that the codes or the regulations say it should do, or maybe some other ideas. But I'll go to you, Raina, for that.
I suppose it goes back to Neil's point about there's a framework, isn't there? There's regulations and there's a code of conduct, and the first port, of course, be are you working to that code of conduct and that framework, and are you spending public money, or our money? I mean, we pay probably nearly 500 grand a year in CQC fees, and other providers across the country are paying for something, and is that money and any money from the government being used in a beneficial and efficient and effective way? And so I think that's a kind of starting point. Then you've got the issue that what is the government expecting of that regulator? And I think that's where things like that streeting statement worry me, because I think it's said with the best intent, but it's about it's encouraging, the danger is these reports encourage a more punitive way because they want to be seen to be effective. And how publicly can the CQC be seen to be effective for government, or they'll go out and start, I mean, Martin talks about the fines being levied, but, we'll start closing providers down. We'll start, prosecuting them more. We'll show that we're protecting the public. And that's not really the response we want. What we're saying is actually we want a more proportionate and positive working relationship to drive up standards of care. So I think the government could be clearer around that. Personally, as an organisation that's part of the market oversight scheme, I think they could absolutely look about where that money is spent in terms of organisational management, board, senior management roles, what a role's actually achieving and doing, and how do they use the data that they extract from us. They demand a huge amount from providers. I mean, it makes me laugh every time I see one of the many PIR requests come through. Oh, this will just take you 7 hours to complete, and then what? And then we'll send it back, and you stick it in a folder somewhere. No one ever looks at it. Certainly, no one ever refers to it when they come out and inspect, if they ever come and inspect. And actually that is huge amount of time and money across the sector that's being misdirected again. And how much of the data that I give them every quarter with all our financial review, do they give me something back or take that to the Department of Health and Social Care and say, this, you know, this is how critical these issues are in the sector, in social care for people. This is how people's lives are being affected. This is how workforce lives are being affected. And you don't get that sense of that reciprocal kind of information sharing. So I think there is more they can do, but obviously they are supposed to be arm's length. So there is the kind of conduct around that as well.
Yeah.
Certainly more to be done in what does the government expect of our regulator.
Yeah. Neil, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a difficult one because obviously you want independence from government. I think that's obviously crucial. But at the same time, you want a proper accountability through the parliamentary route. So there is that level of parliamentary scrutiny, but you're in a country that's got 90 regulators, big regulators, and Parliament can only spend so much time dealing with the CQC.
Sorry, how many is that, 90 or 19?
90.
90 regulators.
Yeah, and the I think what is it? It's the Industry Regulatory Committee in February this year. They were sort of looking at this area, and what they recommended was that there should be an Office for Regulatory Performance created that would have oversight of all of those 90 regulators. They could look, for example, at the sort of the rollout of the regulatory platform and the regulatory portal, where CQC has spent over £90 million with very little results. Well, I think it's just far worse than their old system.
How many millions?
I think the last shout, I think it was certainly north of 90 odd million. And what you've got to realise is that over 80% of fees of the funding for CQC comes from providers. Only a relatively small amount comes from the government these days. And I'd be interested to see if the government actually is going to sort of put forward additional funding to reform CQC and make it credible again. Because obviously that's obviously a sort of factor as well, because should providers have to bear the cost again and again and again for the regulator's incompetence?
I just think with those figures, I mean, that's why we don't have boots on the ground, because they've been plummeting this money into trying to get a system that could do everything online, which I know it's great that we're doing more things online. We've got emails and all that. But there's nothing like having a person face to face. And if they're spending all of their resources or a huge chunk on this system, I mean, the only people who really benefited from it are these tech companies, which I think are going to make an absolute field day out of health and social care in the next 10 years. But then you don't get the boots on the ground from CQC going in and inspecting, giving us our inspections so we can get loans that we need for the bank to make the changes that we need to in care homes, so we can expand our services and we can deliver what we need to, so we can get registered, so we can have more community services. It harks back to Martin Green's point about governance, because if you get the figures, you know how much you're spending on these things, and you're the scrutiny of these organizations, and it does seem really out of order that they're in this position so far down the road, really. I am going to see if we've got a few comments there. I wanted to just, before I go on to the final question for you both, is there anything else that struck you from either of the reports or a frustration that you come up in your dealings with the regulator in your work that you'd like to mention? Raina, can I come to you? Oh, sorry.
No, I think that general theme of loss of trust and confidence, really, both with the general public, with commissioners, with the government, with the providers. So, I mean, it's how do you recover from that, really? And I think that for me was the general theme. And as I think you said at the beginning, Sophie, almost feeling a bit vindicated that something providers have been saying for a long time, that the system was broken, the regulatory system was broken, was actually seen by these two separate kind of reports. And I think that trust and confidence, some of that is about systems and some of it is about attitude and that respect and partnership and tone and looking for good and proportionate management when things aren't going right, and the way that emails are constructed, the way that telephone conversations, the way that inspections, and those things can go a long way, and not making providers feel that they're just wasting their time. And what we've got a situation where, as Martin said, we've got local authorities that tell people to ignore CQC reports. We've got a public that doesn't bother looking at them anymore. We've got providers who are completely disillusioned and stuck with them. So I think that just general feeling of reframing everything just came through loud and clear, really.
Yeah, thanks for that, Raina. And Neil, in your line of work, are there particular things that are coming up from providers about CQC?
How long have you got? You've got the rest of the evening. So I think the thing that really worries me is the risk of arbitrary decision making, and this is where we've entered now. I think that there's no proper ability to really sort of understand how CQC are reaching their sort of judgments. They've introduced, as Raina said, this rather complicated scoring system. I think that's going to go, but obviously we're then left with the quality statements, and where's that going to take us? The absurdity of regulation in this country can be expressed quite simply, really. And this has been around for a few years. I mean, we're focusing on the period over the last sort of 10 months or, 12 months or so. But there's been a decline in regulation for many, many years in terms of quality of regulation. But look at the rating characteristics that CQC recently issued for sort of consultation. And it says again that requires improvement, regulations may or may not be met. So what on earth does that mean? So, and then it says for inadequate, normally some regulations are not met. So does that mean that you can be inadequate, but you can actually be meeting the regulations? And also going back to requires improvement, it's sort of saying, well, in actual fact, you can be meeting all the regulations, but you still require improvement. That's been around for a while, that particular sort of standard, as it were. And that means there's a complete absence of clarity in terms of what a rating actually means and how you achieve it. What they should do is ditch the ratings, which they're going to do for Ofsted. If they're going to do it for Ofsted, they should do it for CQC. They're both mega regulators. And they should go back to compliance. They should say, are you meeting the regulations, the terms of the statutory requirements? And that's enough. And if you are, you're a good regulator. If you're not, then obviously they can take action against you. But it needs to be evidence-based. It needs to be very, very clear as to how they're going to go about forming these judgments. Because at the moment, there's a real risk, as I say, of arbitrary decision-making. The final thing I would say is that I think in this particular sort of scenario that we've got at the moment with the regulator, I do think that providers could look at sort of accountability, liability on the part of CQC for the way that they're operating at the moment. Because if providers do incur losses as a result of this poor regulation, why should they bear the costs? I had a case a few years ago where basically it was a poor inspection. At the end of it all, I said, I presume CQC, you'll be telling your insurers about this. They then contacted NHS Resolution. We went through NHS Resolution. We got the legal cost paid up to 75%. Now, that's not compensation as such. It's basically only getting your money back that you paid on the lawyers. But I think here it's more fundamental. And I think that's something that Martin Green actually mentioned earlier, that there's an issue here, I think, about the culture of CQC, its performance. And I think there's an issue really that if there are losses, I can see a situation where a provider could sue CQC and they could be successful.
That is so interesting. Did you hear that, people? So if you are thinking of doing that, maybe Neil, you might be someone that they want to get in touch with. But no, not encouraging that too much, just tongue in cheek. That was really, really interesting. And also I wanted to put up, I did have a banner on, I did have one of the questions, because one of the findings or the conclusions was the lack of clarity regarding how ratings are calculated. And sometimes, I put up an image of a blank piece of paper, because sometimes I would read some of these ratings and I just didn't feel like I got anything from them. I didn't get a sense of the organisation. I didn't get a sense of what they were doing right, if they were outstanding. And it was really interesting to hear you kind of deconstruct a little bit some of the issues about just going back to basics. I do remember years ago, it was very clear when you didn't meet the regulation, that was why you were being downgraded from excellent to good, or whatever the rating was before we have what we have now. So, sorry, excuse me, it's just not very transparent. So a last question, very, very last one. I didn't get to put this banner up before, so I'll put it up very quickly now. Should we quit or keep the CQC? So when I say quit, I mean, should we just start again, brand new regulator? Should we quit it? That's what I mean by quitting it. If we're keeping it, should we have it as it is, but it just needs a few tweaks? So Raina, what's your instinct?
I think regulation is really important. I think, finishing on a bit of a positive note, as someone who's worked in social care since 1988 or so, I think that we lose sight sometimes of how far we've come in terms of pushing the quality of care. And I think that's been diminished in recent years by funding and commissioning and other drivers. But I think in terms of public protection of people using care services, I think we've come a long way in those years. So wouldn't want to lose that. And I think it's a really important part of our social care structure. However, it's broken, needs reforming, needs back to basics, and it really does need back to basics and not more complications.
Great, thank you for that, Raina. And Neil, keep or quit?
Yeah, no, I mean, despite my sort of negative commentary about CQC, I'm a great sort of believer in regulation. For many years, I acted for regulators, including the CQC in its first year. I mean, it's now sort of 15 years old, so it's a sort of an adolescent now, isn't it? That's going through a sort of difficult period. It's the second time that CQC is screwed up. Obviously, it screwed up sort of 12 years ago with Winterbourne View and sort of the rest. It came back from that with David Bean. It improved its act. It got its credibility back. It screwed up this time. It needs to get somebody at the helm that's actually got authority. I don't think that the current people within CQC can be trusted to get it right, and I include people at the policy level there. I think you're going to have to get new people in, but I think you're going to have to get people of caliber, and you're also going to have to get sort of external support, I think, to actually develop a system that functions, that actually works. Because, yeah, at the end of the day, we need a national regulator, and regulation is essential, and we've got a lot of committed inspectors out there that are there for the right reasons, and we need to support them, and we need to give them the right training and the right resources, and importantly, the right regulatory framework that they can deliver under.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you both for your wonderful insights. It's been lovely to see you virtually, at least anyway. So thank you very much. I'm going to take you out. Thank you. And hopefully we'll see each other soon. Take care. Great. So that was that. Very interesting. I'm actually really looking forward to looking back at that this live stream. I didn't manage to play a clip, and I want to play this clip. It's from a podcast from the NHS Confederation, and I think it's helpful to see the link between, obviously, CQC regulates health and social care. So if it's not working, obviously we're talking from a social care perspective. It's also not working from a health perspective. And Penny Dash actually talks herself about the issue that ICBs or commissioning authorities in the NHS have if the system itself isn't working. So I'll just play this very briefly.
What for a large acute provider that is struggling with, I can't get people out of the back door into a care home because there's certain rules and regulations about, what you can do and when you can discharge and when you can't and what a care home can do. I've got people coming in the front door, and how do I think about
Sorry, I cut that off a little bit. Let me just go back down there and just do that again. Give me a sec.
What for a large acute provider that is struggling with, I can't get people out of the back door into a care home because there's certain rules and regulations about, what you can do and when you can discharge and when you can't and what a care home can do. I've got people coming in the front door, and how do I think about balance of risk between, are they in the ambulance, are they in the A&E, are they in the wards? These are really, really complex considerations, whether you're sitting in an ICB, you're sitting in a care home, or you're sitting in an acute trust. And how we think about those in the round is complicated. And does our model of regulation take into account that complexity?
So there you go. Does our model of regulation take into account the complexity that which is in health and social care? So a lot to think about. The last thing I will mention is something exciting coming up with co-produced care. We have started a new initiative. We're calling it the Each One Teach One Health and Social Care Leadership Academy, and we've just got CPD accredited for our first course, and I'm going to go into detail more in a few days' time when we have our next live stream about Each One Teach One, what it means, what we're doing, and what we hope to help the sector with. The first set of training is going to happen in February, and it's going to be a program, 3 months, and there'll be a meeting once a month for 3 hours. That sounds like a long time, but we're going to give you a lot for that time, and we're going to really support people with recruitment, retention and employment law, and we will be going to our wonderful friends of co-produced care who've supported us before to take part in that as well. So I'm really excited about that. If you sign up, if you email us, or if you sign up to our membership, which is absolutely free, you'll be able to find out more information about that. I'm really excited to bring that to everybody in the sector in the next few weeks and months. And also we'll be holding another live stream in a few more days' time. And we're really excited to talk about a bit of the law. I'm not going to let you know exactly about it. I just want you to sign up, email us, go on to coproducecare.com and find out more about what we've got coming up. But I've been really enjoyed this session, and I hope that everybody else has too. And I very much look forward to another session of interviews and live streams with everybody. So thanks everybody for joining, and please do remember to link in with us, email, join our membership, so that we can interact more with the sector, that we can offer the sector a bit more, and we can share knowledge. And actually Each One Teach One is about teaching people within the sector a little bit more about what we do. And actually I'll just give you a bit of a preview now. So Each One Teach One, I know the term, and lots of people that I know the term, but it's all about supporting people. So in the Caribbean community, we'd often say if we wanted a sibling to help a younger sibling with homework, for example, Each One Teach One, we're all helping each other. And this is what we're hoping to do with the Social Care Leadership Academy, because the knowledge that's in the sector is often more fruitful than any training that you can actually get. So we're marrying together peer-to-peer mentoring, CPD accredited training, and of course we're also going to be encouraging people to share information about what they're doing and good practice. So a lot is going to be going on, and very much hope that you'll all join us in that new venture. But for now, I'd just like to say thank you very much for being involved in our live stream today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take